The early Chicago winter had already begun its icy grip. I watched the wet snow swirl past the window of the Book Nook, the small, cozy bookstore where I worked. It was a charming little place, tucked away on a street lined with brownstones, a bit of an anomaly in this otherwise bustling part of the city. Huddling deeper into my sweater, I wiped away the condensation that had fogged the glass, the warmth from the nearby coffee machine doing little to combat the chill seeping in from outside. I glanced at the clock above the counter. It was almost time for Lily to be home from school. I should probably head out a bit early today. "Sarah, you can go ahead and finish up for the day. Don't you need to pick up Lily?" Mrs. Davison, the owner, said with a kind smile. She was a lifesaver, always so understanding of my situation as a single mom. "Thank you, Mrs. Davison. I really appreciate that," I replied, quickly untying my apron. A perpetual weariness seemed etched around my eyes these days. Raising a 6-year-old on my own was never easy, but Lily was my everything. Her father, Mark, had been taken from us too soon, a tragic car accident just a few months after she was born. For 6 years, it had just been the two of us. Our life was simple, our apartment small, but it was filled with more love than I could have ever imagined. On my walk home, the wind whipped through the streets, biting at my cheeks. I stopped at the mailbox, its metal cold against my gloved hand. Amongst the usual bills and junk mail, a single, elegant envelope stood out. It was thick, creamy white, with my name and address printed in delicate silver lettering. My heart gave a little flutter of apprehension as I opened it. Inside, a formal invitation, engraved in silver on heavy cardstock, announced the upcoming wedding of my sister Emily to Daniel Hayes, the son of a prominent local real estate developer. I couldn't help the sigh that escaped my lips. Emily was getting married. Emily, with her effortless beauty and natural charm, had always seemed destined for a life of ease. Daniel Hayes was exactly the kind of man our mother, Patricia, had always envisioned for her. I carried the invitation up to our small apartment, a mix of complicated emotions swirling within me. "Mom!" The moment I opened the door, Lily sprang from the small table where she was diligently coloring, her bright smile instantly melting away the day's fatigue. "How was your day? Did you have fun at school?" I asked, pulling her into a hug. "Yes, and look!" She held up her drawing, a vibrant explosion of color. "Mrs. Gable said it was the best one in the class." Lily beamed with pride. While I started preparing a simple dinner, my thoughts drifted back to the invitation. Since our father, Robert, had passed away 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, the already fragile connection with my mother and sister had become even more tenuous. Mom had always had a soft spot for Emily, almost to a fault, while our relationship had always felt distant. Dad had been the one constant, my rock, and now he was gone. I honestly wasn't sure if I should even attend the wedding. It felt like stepping back into a world where I didn't quite belong. But then, as we were eating dinner, Lily spotted the invitation on the counter. "Auntie Emily's wedding. Can we go, Mommy? Please?" Her eyes were wide with innocent excitement. To her, this was a special, magical event. I looked at her sweet face, her genuine enthusiasm shining through. How could I say no? For her sake, I would go. I managed a smile, though a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. How would Mom and Emily treat us? At the few family gatherings since Dad's passing, Lily and I had always felt like outsiders looking in. Later that night, after Lily was tucked into bed, I sat on our worn living room sofa and pulled out an old photo album. Flipping through the pages, I lingered on the pictures of Dad and me. A wave of sadness washed over me as I remembered his warm smile, his unwavering belief in me. William Robert Griffin might have presented a stern facade as the head of a successful construction company, but to me, he had always been kind, supportive, and respectful of my choices, even when they differed from Mom's expectations. Since the day he died, it felt like my place within the family had vanished completely. "Victoria, thank you for the invitation," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Lily and I will be there." There was a slight pause on the other end of the line, and then Emily responded with a tone that held a hint of surprise. "Oh, you're coming? How nice. Mother will be pleased too, I'm sure. The insincerity in her words was palpable, but I chose to ignore it. Lily is really looking forward to it. It's her aunt's wedding after all, I continued. Yes, of course, Emily replied quickly. But Sarah, could you and Lily please ensure you both come in proper attire? Daniel's family members are all, well, they're very high society. We wouldn't want to embarrass anyone. Her words stung, hitting a raw nerve. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remain calm. Don't worry, Emily. We won't embarrass you, I said quietly before ending the call. I looked out at the gray, snow-covered cityscape. Despite Emily's condescending tone, I resolved to attend this wedding, not for them, but for Lily and in memory of Dad. The day of the wedding arrived, cold and crisp. The Regent Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago was a spectacle of elegance. White orchids and silver ribbons adorned everything from the entrance to the grand ballroom, and a plush crimson carpet covered the gleaming marble floors. Lily and I stepped out of the taxi, our expressions a mixture of awe and nervousness as we entered the opulent lobby. I had carefully chosen a modest navy blue dress for myself and a neat little suit for Lily, using a significant portion of my savings. Even so, standing amongst the other guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits, we felt noticeably plain. "Mommy, everyone is so sparkly," Lily whispered, her eyes wide with a mix of curiosity and a touch of apprehension. "Yes, they are, sweetie, but it's okay. We were invited, so we should hold our heads high," I said, gently putting my arm around her shoulders. As we entered the ceremony hall, a hushed reverence filled the air. We were guided to seats towards the back. The hall resembled a cathedral, with soaring ceilings and extravagant floral arrangements. Emily and Daniel's wedding ceremony proceeded in a traditional and seemingly heartfelt manner. The bride, radiant in a pristine white gown, looked like she had stepped out of a fairy tale. After the vows and the exchange of rings, the guests were directed to the grand ballroom on the top floor. The sheer size of the room was breathtaking. It could easily accommodate hundreds of people. Decorated in champagne gold and shimmering crystal, the light from the enormous chandeliers created a dreamlike ambiance. Lily and I were led to a small, round table tucked away in a corner. A simple card on the table read, "Griffin Family Relatives." My mother wasn't there. I saw her seated at the prominent head table, laughing and chatting with Daniel's parents. As the reception began, a seemingly endless parade of exquisite dishes was served. Lily's eyes sparkled with delight as she tasted food she had only ever seen in pictures. Despite the underlying tension I felt, it warmed my heart to see her enjoying herself. Several times I caught my mother's eye, but Patricia quickly looked away, her expression cool and dismissive. After the meal and the cutting of the elaborate wedding cake, the master of ceremonies, a slick-haired man in a tuxedo, stepped onto the small stage. "And now," he announced with a flourish, "from our wonderful bride and groom, we have a very special entertainment for all our guests." The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and soft music began to play. Suddenly, a bright spotlight illuminated our small table in the corner. Lily and I looked up in surprise, blinking in the sudden glare. Emily, still stunning in her white gown, gracefully walked towards us from the central stage, a microphone in her hand. A wide, seemingly genuine smile stretched across her face. But something in her eyes, a flicker of something unreadable, sent a shiver of unease down my spine. "Everyone," Emily said, her voice sweet and clear as it echoed through the ballroom, "thank you all so much for sharing in my special day." She paused, her smile widening. "But there's one more special thing I wanted to do today. Please, everyone, look over here." All eyes in the grand ballroom turned towards Lily and me. Lily instinctively shrank back in her chair, clutching my hand tightly, her small face flushed with embarrassment. "As you all know," Emily continued, her tone taking on a saccharine quality, "my sister Sarah is a single mother, and this is her adorable daughter, my niece, Lily. They live a somewhat different life than the rest of us." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the room. I sat frozen, a cold dread creeping into my heart. I had a terrible feeling I knew where this was going. "So today," Emily announced, her voice suddenly louder and more theatrical. "I thought we could all participate in a little charity auction." A gasp escaped my lips. "Yes!" Emily exclaimed, her smile now wide and unsettling. "This lovely single mother and her sweet daughter, as a set. Would anyone like to make a bid? Let's see what we can do for them." The ballroom erupted in laughter. People in their expensive clothes and glittering jewelry were laughing as if they were watching some absurd circus act. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes. "Mommy?" Her voice trembled as she looked up at me, her small hand squeezing mine even tighter. I tried to stand up, to grab Lily and get us out of there, but I froze, my blood running cold at what happened next. My mother, Patricia, stood up from the head table, a microphone now in her hand, a cruel smile twisting her lips. "Let me add something, darling," she said, her voice amplified through the ballroom. "This auction can start at, let's say $0. After all," she added with a harsh laugh that echoed through the stunned silence that followed the initial outburst, "I don't think they have any real value anyway." A fresh wave of laughter, more hesitant this time, rippled through the room. My chest felt like it would explode with a mixture of rage and humiliation. Lily was now crying openly, her small shoulders shaking with sobs. Seeing her distress, the sight of her tears, snapped me out of my shock. "Let's go, Lily," I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly as I took her hand, ready to pull her up and out of this nightmare. But just as we started to rise, a calm, yet undeniably powerful voice cut through the stunned silence. $1 million. The ballroom fell utterly silent. Every single head in the room swiveled towards the back, all eyes fixed on the source of the voice. Standing there, with an air of quiet confidence, was a distinguished gentleman. His black hair was streaked with silver at the temples, and he wore a perfectly tailored dark suit. His blue eyes, calm and piercing, held an undeniable air of authority and dignity. "I will buy this lady and her daughter for $1 million, the man repeated, his voice clear and unwavering. Emily's forced smile faltered. "Well," she stammered, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Someone certainly has a sense of humor." "This is not a joke," the man said quietly, his gaze fixed on Emily as he began to walk slowly towards the center of the ballroom. "My name is Harrison. I am Robert Griffin's attorney." My breath caught in my throat. My father's attorney? I barely knew any of his business associates, but I had heard that name mentioned once or twice, Mr. Harrison continued to walk until he reached the center of the room, his gaze then shifting towards Lily and me. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips before his attention turned, his eyes now cold and fixed on Emily and Patricia. "Shall we continue this auction?" he asked quietly, his voice still carrying that undercurrent of power. "Or shall we move on to the time to speak the truth?" At Mr. Harrison's words, the grand ballroom was enveloped in complete silence. The only sound was the soft hum of the chandeliers illuminating his composed face. The groom, Daniel, looked at Emily with a bewildered expression, while his parents exchanged worried glances. "Before I speak further," Mr. Harrison said, turning his attention back to Lily and me, "please allow me to first apologize. Ms. Sarah Griffin, Lily, I deeply regret that the truth must be conveyed in this manner today. However, this was the express wish of the late Robert Griffin." I held Lily close, my mind reeling, staring at Mr. Harrison with an expression that was a confusing mix of agitation and disbelief. Lily had stopped crying, but her small body was still trembling against mine. "Stop this nonsense!" Patricia's voice cut through the silence, sharp and shrill. Her face was contorted with fury. "Who are you? My husband didn't have a personal attorney. All his legal matters were handled by Miller and Zois." Mr. Harrison reached inside his suit jacket and produced a thick envelope with a gentle smile. "That is correct, Mrs. Griffin. However, approximately 10 years ago, William began consulting me for personal matters, specifically regarding his true and final will." "That's a lie!" Emily shrieked, her composure finally cracking. "Father's will has already been executed. Everything was handled legally." Mr. Harrison slowly opened the envelope and extracted a notarized document. Yes, he said calmly, his gaze sweeping across the room. The apparent will was indeed executed. But this, he held up the document, is the real, legally valid final will and testament of Robert William Griffin. He paused for effect. William, for very specific reasons, prepared 2 wills. He then gestured towards the large screens that had been used earlier to display photos of the happy couple. If you would please direct your attention to the screens. The image on the screens changed, now displaying a document with the heading, The Final Will and Testament of Robert William Griffin, dated October 27, 2022. Detailed clauses were written below. Mr. Harrison began to read, his voice clear and resonant. The late Robert William Griffin clearly expressed his unequivocal intention to bequeath 85% of all his assets, including all shares of Griffin Construction and all personal property, to be divided equally between his beloved daughter, Sarah Griffin, and his cherished granddaughter, Lily Griffin. A collective murmur rippled through the ballroom. Patricia and Emily both paled, their eyes wide with shock as they stared at each other. Daniel's father, a portly man with a booming voice, grabbed his son's arm and whispered something urgently in his ear. Mr. Harrison continued, unfazed by the reactions. The remaining 15% is to be held in trust as a living security for Patricia Griffin, with no further rights or claims to the estate. Furthermore, the complete management and operational rights of Griffin Construction are to be immediately and irrevocably transferred to Sarah Griffin. He reached into the envelope again and produced another document. And this, he said, holding it up, is a comprehensive forensic accounting report detailing the flow of assets over the past 3 years. It includes irrefutable evidence of numerous illegal and unauthorized fund transfers made by both Patricia Griffin and Emily Griffin. The screens now displayed a complex array of numbers, bank statements, and transaction records. Mr. Harrison continued his explanation in an impassive tone. Before William sadly succumbed to a heart attack, he was deeply concerned about his declining health. He worried about what might transpire after his passing, particularly that Sarah and Lily might be treated unjustly and deprived of what was rightfully theirs. Tears welled up in my eyes. I had no idea my father had harbored such worries, had gone to such lengths to protect us. I remembered the warmth in his eyes every time I looked at his picture, the quiet strength he always exuded. William gave me specific instructions, Mr. Harrison continued, to monitor the actions of Patricia and Emily for a period of 3 years after his death, to meticulously collect evidence of any wrongdoing, and to reveal the truth at the most opportune moment. He paused, looking directly at me. He was immensely proud of Sarah's resilience and independence. He wanted to see her thrive on her own merits, but at the same time, he was determined to ensure that the inheritance she rightfully deserved would indeed reach her hands. Patricia stood up, her entire body trembling with uncontrollable rage. This is complete and utter nonsense. I was William's wife. I am the one who has the right to inherit his company's shares. Legally speaking, Mrs. Griffin, Mr. Harrison replied calmly, his voice unwavering. That is simply not the case. This will is legally sound and has already been submitted to the probate court. In fact, he nodded towards a stern-faced man sitting quietly in a corner of the ballroom, the presiding judge is present here today. The man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. This is fraud, Emily screamed, her face red with fury. We've done nothing wrong. Mr. Harrison reached into the final envelope. Then perhaps, he said softly, we should hear William's own words. He carefully extracted a folded letter and began to read, his voice filled with a quiet emotion. My dearest Sarah and Lily, he began, if you are reading this letter, it means that Mr. Harrison has acted according to my instructions, and you are probably very confused right now. First, I am so sorry. I want to apologize for not revealing the full truth to you these past 3 years, but I had my reasons. I needed to be certain of your strength, Sarah, your ability to raise Lily with the same love and dedication you have always shown, and I needed to expose Martha and Emily's true nature to the world. Mr. Harrison paused, his gaze softening as he looked at me. He then continued reading. They have been manipulating me for years, subtly trying to divert the company's assets for their own selfish gain. As my health declined, I knew they had already begun to formulate their next plan, to exclude you, Sarah, from the company and cut you off from your rightful inheritance. But you, my dear Sarah, are my true successor. I have always admired your honesty, your strength, and above all, your kindness. These are the most important qualities in business, too, and Lily is growing into such a wonderful child. That is all thanks to your love and devotion. Griffin Construction is yours, Sarah, and in time, it will be Lily's. No matter what your mother and sister may try to do, this will is legally binding. Trust Mr. Harrison. He is my most trusted friend and will protect you both. Finally, just one more thing. I am always so incredibly proud of you, Sarah. And Lily, Grandpa is always watching over you. With all my love, Dad. When Mr. Harrison finished reading, the ballroom was completely silent. Tears streamed down my face, silent and unstoppable. Lily looked up at me, her expression a mixture of confusion and concern. "Mommy?" she asked in a small voice. "Did Grandpa remember me?" I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her hair. "Yes, sweetie, of course he remembered you. Grandpa always loved you very, very much." The color had completely drained from Patricia and Emily's faces. Daniel's father stood up abruptly, his voice booming with anger. "What is the meaning of this? I was about to have my son marry into a family of fraudsters." Richard stared at Emily, his expression a mask of stunned disbelief, his eyes reflecting a painful mixture of sadness and the sharp sting of betrayal. Mr. Harrison approached our table and said quietly, "Ms. Griffin, Lily, shall we leave this place? All the necessary legal procedures are already in progress. There is still much you need to know." I stood up, taking Lily's hand in mine. I surveyed the room, my gaze sweeping over the shocked faces, the whispers that had begun to erupt. The figures of my mother and sister no longer registered in my mind. The only emotions that resonated within me were a profound sense of gratitude towards my father and a quiet determination for the new life that was about to begin. Mr. Harrison's sleek black sedan pulled away quietly from the back entrance of the Regent Grand Hotel. Sitting in the passenger seat, I gazed at the glittering city lights outside the window, gently draping my coat over Lily, who had finally fallen fast asleep in the back seat, her small hand still clutching mine. A whirlwind of emotions swirled within me: love for my father, a deep ache of sadness and anger towards my mother and sister, and above all, the overwhelming shock that everything I thought I knew had been a lie. "You must be exhausted," Mr. Harrison said quietly, breaking the silence. "I've booked a suite at a nearby hotel for tonight. The legal procedures will begin in earnest tomorrow, so please try to rest well." I took a deep breath before finally asking the question that had been nagging at me. Why didn't Dad ever tell me anything?" Mr. Harrison thought for a moment before answering. "William wanted to protect you, Sarah. He saw through Martha and Emily's schemes years ago, but he avoided direct confrontation. When his health began to fail, he anticipated exactly what they would do. But why 3 years? That was William's plan. He wanted you to stand on your own 2 feet, to prove your strength and independence, and he was waiting for Martha and Emily to essentially hang themselves with their own actions. Mr. Harrison's gaze remained fixed on the road ahead. He knew you would raise Lily admirably, and he also knew you possessed the inherent qualities to take over Griffin Construction. I quietly wiped away the tears that had started to flow again. I never knew he believed in me so much." Mr. Harrison offered a gentle smile. "He was always incredibly proud of you, Sarah. He often told me, 'Sarah is strong. No matter what happens, she will always stand tall.'" The next morning, Lily and I met Mr. Harrison at his impressive downtown office. The large conference room was already filled with stacks of legal documents: court orders, temporary injunctions, asset freezing documents. Mr. Harrison had clearly been working tirelessly. "William's true will has already been submitted to the probate court and authenticated," he explained, gesturing to one of the thick files. "The judge who was present at the wedding last night has also signed off on the initial orders. Martha and Emily's assets are now frozen, and all the illegal fund transfers they made are legally nullified." "What happens now?" I asked, feeling a sense of both relief and overwhelming uncertainty. Lily was in the adjacent room, happily listening to Mr. Harrison's secretary read her a story. "First and foremost, Mr. Harrison said, leaning forward slightly, "the management rights of Griffin Construction will be immediately transferred to you, Sarah. All company accounts will also be placed under your direct authority. We will, of course, be demanding the full return of all company funds that Martha and Emily misappropriated." I ran a hand through my hair, a wave of dizziness washing over me. Can I really manage such a large company?" Mr. Harrison smiled, a genuine, reassuring smile this time. "You majored in business administration, didn't you?" "William knew everything, Sarah. He knew you graduated with excellent grades from a top business school. What you lacked was practical experience, and frankly, the opportunity. There is already a strong and capable team in place at Griffin Construction, and I will, of course, be there to support you every step of the way." William left detailed plans for this transition. Over the next few weeks, my life underwent a seismic shift. Legal battles commenced, but the sheer volume and irrefutable nature of the evidence Mr. Harrison had compiled made it an uphill battle for Patricia and Emily. They ultimately lost everything: their lavish home, their expensive possessions, and, of course, their access to the company funds they had been illegally using. Emily's engagement to Daniel was promptly broken off, and she completely vanished from the city's social scene. Patricia followed suit, and they were both forced to move to a small, nondescript apartment in the suburbs of Boston, their lives of privilege replaced by a quiet, almost anonymous existence. Lily started at a new school, a bright and welcoming place where she quickly made friends, and I began going to the Griffin Construction headquarters every day as the newly appointed CEO. The initial days were a blur of meetings, unfamiliar faces, and a steep learning curve. There was some initial confusion and skepticism among the longtime employees, many of whom had worked with my father for decades and had known my mother and sister for years. But gradually, as they witnessed my dedication and my own inherent understanding of the business, something I realized I had absorbed simply by being my father's daughter, their doubts began to fade. "You are William's daughter, through and through," one of the veteran executives remarked one afternoon, a hint of a smile on his face. "You've inherited his sharp insight and his inherent kindness." I simply smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through me. About 3 months after taking over my father's company, I invited Mr. Harrison over for dinner. Lily had already gone to sleep, and we sat in my small living room, a comfortable silence settling between us. Our conversations had gradually evolved beyond strictly business matters, and we had begun to share small details about our lives. "There's still something you're not telling me, isn't there?" I asked, pouring us both a glass of wine. Mr. Harrison looked thoughtful for a moment before answering. "William first contacted me approximately 10 years ago. From around that time, he had begun to have serious suspicions about Martha and Emily's financial dealings. So, Dad planned all of this for 10 years? To protect me?" I asked, a wave of disbelief washing over me. "Yes," Mr. Harrison confirmed. "He wanted to ensure your and Lily's future security. He made me promise him one last thing, Sarah: to watch over you both." I smiled, a genuine smile this time. "You've certainly kept that promise, Mr. Harrison." From that day on, my life took on a new sense of purpose. Running Griffin Construction was challenging, but it was also incredibly rewarding. I announced a new vision for the company, one that focused on environmentally friendly and sustainable housing development, as well as a significant initiative to create affordable housing and support programs for single-parent families. "I want to continue my father's legacy, but also lead this company in a new direction," I declared at my first board meeting. "We will become a company that not only builds structures but also contributes meaningfully to our community." My proposal was met with unanimous approval. I also established the William Griffin Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting single parents in the Chicago area. Lily, with her infectious enthusiasm, became something of a mascot for the foundation, happily participating in various events and fundraisers. "Mommy," she said one day, her eyes shining with earnestness, I want to help people who are in trouble too, just like Grandpa would have. I hugged her tightly. You certainly can, sweetie. My relationship with Mr. Harrison deepened as well. He was no longer just our legal advisor, but had become a trusted confidant and a dear friend, a steady and reliable presence in both Lily's and my life. He started taking Lily to baseball games on weekends and visiting the Science Museum with her. The first day I sat in my father's old president's office, a large, imposing room with panoramic views of the city, I picked up the framed photograph of him that sat on the mahogany desk. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered, a fresh wave of tears welling up in my eyes. "I'll do my best. I promise." Outside the window, the warm sunlight of spring was beginning to bathe the city of Chicago. Meanwhile, in a small, rented apartment in the suburbs of Boston, Patricia Griffin stood by the window, gazing out at the rain-soaked street. Her once impeccably styled hair was now dull and lifeless, and the designer clothes had been replaced by modest, off-the-rack garments. In the corner of the cramped living room, Emily sat hunched over her laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating her tired face. She now worked as a low-level clerk at a local real estate agency, a stark contrast to the life of luxury she had once taken for granted. Her ties with the Hayes family had been completely severed, and her former high society friends had all but forgotten her existence. "Mother, would you like something to drink?" Emily asked, looking up from her work. Her expression no longer held the entitled arrogance of the past. "Thank you, dear. Some tea would be lovely," Patricia answered with a sigh, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. A year had passed since the wedding. Their lives had been irrevocably altered. From a sprawling mansion to a cramped apartment, from chauffeured limousines to public transportation. But most significantly, for the first time in their lives, they were forced to make a living with their own hands. One crisp autumn afternoon, they made the trip back to Chicago. They stood hesitantly in the reception area of Griffin Construction, the gleaming brass plate on the wall reading, "Griffin Real Estate, President Sarah Griffin." "Sorry to keep you waiting," Sarah's secretary said, her tone polite but professional. "Please, come in." When they opened the door to the president's office, there she was, Sarah. No longer the quiet, somewhat overlooked woman in a bookstore uniform, but a confident, poised businesswoman seated behind a large desk. Through the expansive window behind her, the Chicago skyline stretched out in its full glory. "Mother, Emily," Sarah said, standing up to greet them. There was no trace of hostility in her demeanor, only a quiet, almost sad dignity. "It's been a while, Sarah," Patricia said, her voice trembling slightly. We wanted to see you." "Please, sit down," Sarah gestured towards the comfortable sofa in the corner of the office. As Patricia and Emily sat down, their eyes darting around the spacious room, Sarah took a seat opposite them. "We came to apologize," Emily said quietly, her gaze fixed on her hands. "We did terrible things to you and Lily. What happened at the wedding, and with Dad's inheritance." Her voice trailed off. "That's in the past," Sarah replied calmly. "What matters now is what we do going forward." "What do you mean?" Patricia asked anxiously, her eyes searching Sarah's face. Sarah reached into a drawer and pulled out some documents. "This is a new arrangement I've prepared. It guarantees you both a comfortable monthly allowance to cover rent and living expenses. I intend to fully recognize the 15% rights that Dad originally intended for you, Mother." Patricia and Emily looked at the documents with stunned expressions, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Why?" Emily asked, tears welling up in her eyes. "After everything we did to you?" Sarah gazed out at the city skyline for a long moment before answering. "Because that's what Dad would have wanted. He valued family despite everything. And for Lily, you are her grandmother and her aunt. That's important." The two women were speechless, tears now streaming down Patricia's face. For the first time, perhaps, she felt a genuine pang of love, not for the company or the wealth, but for her granddaughter. "There is one condition," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. "I would like you both to meet with Lily once a month. She has the right to know her grandmother and her aunt." Tears flowed freely from Patricia's eyes. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt a genuine connection, a flicker of remorse. On Christmas night, Sarah's new home, a warm and inviting space filled with laughter, was brightly lit. Around the festively decorated Christmas tree were Lily's friends, several employees from Griffin Real Estate, and two special invited guests, Patricia and Emily. "A toast," Mr. Harrison said, raising his glass, a warm smile directed at Sarah. "To a wonderful future." Sarah smiled back at him, a sense of deep gratitude filling her heart. Their relationship had gradually blossomed from a professional partnership into something much more profound. By the snowy window, Lily picked up the framed photograph of her grandfather. "Mommy," she said softly, her eyes filled with a childlike wonder. "I never got to meet Grandpa, but he must have been a really good person, right?" Sarah walked over and hugged her daughter tightly. "Yes, sweetie. Your grandpa was the best person in the world, and even now I know he's watching over us." Outside the window, snow continued to fall quietly on the city of Chicago, blanketing everything in a peaceful, hopeful white.